Hello, everyone. It's great to see a few of you already here. Welcome on board. So, just as we wait for others to join, let's make sure the chat function is working. So, I would quickly request the attendees to drop a message in the chat and let us know where you are joining from. If you could do that, that would be great. I could see a few from Sydney. Well, I'm based in Sydney, so it's great to see all of you from different locations. All right, let's kick things off. Once again, welcome on board. My name is Sushil Kunwa, and I've been with Informa Connect Academy for more than 7 years. And I specialize in crafting bespoke learning programs or on-site training programs. And today we have Professor Peter Moore, who is going to share some interesting or fascinating insights on what's happening into the clean energy market. And We'll be talking more on the clean energy and the trends that's going on globally and locally. So before we jump into the main event, just a couple of quick things. This broadcast will run for about 30 minutes. We will be recording this broadcast and we will share the recording in coming days. And if you have any questions during the session, I would request everyone to use the chat function and put on your questions in there. So we'll be taking up the questions, as many as we can, towards the end. All right, so I'll just hand it over to Professor Peter Moore. If you could quickly introduce yourself and what prompted you to start this webinar today, that would be great. Over to you, Professor Moore.
Thanks, Cecil, and welcome everyone. Yeah, my background is originally through oil and gas. I was the global head of exploration for Woodside for many years. I was global studies manager for Exxon worldwide for many years. About 11 years ago, I went to the business school at Curtin University, became a prof there. And since then, I've been on various boards, but I've also been teaching extensively for Informa and for others in energy and the energy transition. Today, though, when I think about teaching, as I do for Informa, the two-day energy transition course, I actually cover about a dozen different technologies. Their global growth, economics, opportunities, challenges, and progress in Australia. But of course, I only have half an hour, so I'm going to extract just one element of a large module on hydrogen and one element of a module on geothermal energy to talk about. I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. First, for what we call gold or natural hydrogen, because it may address the difficult cost challenges of producing cheap, relatively cheap, clean hydrogen. And secondly, on what we call magma power, as it's been branded, we're talking about super high temperature geothermal power here. And the reason for discussing this is it's a developing technology. It's a clean baseload energy source and has the potential to complement variable renewable energy. So two emerging areas of, I think, some interest to the audience. So I'll go through this quite quickly. You'll have access through the webinar to the slides, so I won't dwell on all the words here. But if we think about why the sudden interest in natural hydrogen? Well, first of all, green hydrogen from electrolysis of water is really staying stubbornly expensive. And the question is, could finding and producing natural hydrogen be more economic and competitive? And it's not been pursued in the past. It's not been seen in petroleum wells. It's been thought to be extremely diffusive because it's such a small molecule. And so the exploration prospectivity has been very uncertain. So in terms of exploring for natural hydrogen, this is at its absolute infancy. It requires some novel geological thinking other than by petroleum geoscientists. The primary source is thought to be mostly the interaction of iron-rich rocks and water, with hydrogen being a byproduct of the oxidation of iron, but there's other ways it can form as well, such as radiolysis or natural electrolysis of water through radiation. In Australia, in 2020, some samples from 3 oil wells drilled back in the 1930s recorded some pretty high levels of natural hydrogen. And so they've gone back in there, and in 2021, CSIRO did some new measurements. They looked at some natural seeps around the edge of these circular clay pans and found leaking hydrogen there. And so several companies have gone down to that area on York Peninsula and elsewhere in South Australia, detected natural hydrogen now in soil samples, and they've gone back in and drilled a couple of drill holes. But it's not just Australia. Exploration has started elsewhere in Spain, France, Colombia, USA, Brazil, and some other places I'll mention later on. If there's any sort of question marks where we stand at the moment, it's whether it can accumulate in significant amounts and be extracted and processed economically. So it's going to be an economics question, I think. When we look at the history of natural hydrogen, at the end of last year, there were now 40 companies globally searching for this. And that's up from about 10 in 2020. And that includes Australia, Spain, USA, France, Albania, Colombia, Korea, Canada. And particularly when we go back and have a look at the early interest, it came from Mali. This is the only developed hydrogen field in the world at Bukaburgu, when in 1987, a water well was accidentally ignited by a worker who was smoking a cigarette. The gas was almost 100% hydrogen, and it's been developed post 2011 to supply electricity to a local village. And the supply of that is undiminished. It's still producing. It does about 5 tonnes a year, we believe. In France, in 2023, drilling in the northeast of the country by the research centre there found high levels of hydrogen in water, up to 20%, which we'll see in Australia as well. In Switzerland, they've seen signs of hydrogen there. In the USA, a Colorado company supported by Bill Gates is looking in one of these old rift settings in mid-continental USA. In Spain, they're in the Pyrenees, and they've seen natural hydrogen there. In Brazil, they've done quite a bit of work on these fairy circles. And what they've noticed is that on a daily basis, during the day, the amount that they emit changes, and over days, the position of these emissions changes spatially. And so what they believe is that there's a continuously emitting underlying source of leakage. And over 2 decades, these observations have been made in Russia as well. And of course, we've now got it in the USA, and we're talking about it in Australia. The most recent report I've seen is Albania, where they've seen very high levels of hydrogen in water in a chromium mine, and they estimate that emissions rate is about 11 metric tonnes per year. So just a little image of this Mali one producing field. It's a very old province. There's some dolerites. There's a cross section here that shows an old Precambrian sedimentary section underlined by metasediments and granites, and some dolerite sills that form quite good seals. So underneath the first sill, there's a set of carbonates, limestones, and they have some vugs in them, and those vugs have free hydrogen in them. Underneath the second dolerite sill, there's a sandstone interval, and above about 800 metres, the gas, the hydrogen there is in free form. Below it, it's soluble in water. As they produce the water, the degas the water, and the hydrogen comes out of solution. In Australia, CSIRO here show where one of these clay pans. They've got measurements of hydrogen around it. And the licence areas that exist down here, Kangaroo Island, York Peninsula, and over on the Eyre Peninsula, and all the applications for exploration by various companies scattered around the state. So there's a lot of interest in this, of course. But a lot of focus has been on Gold Hydrogen's Ramsay 1 and 2 wells, following on from the 1931 oil bore that was put down, which was found to contain about 70–80% hydrogen at fairly shallow depths. So these 2 wells were drilled in 2023. They twinned the historic wells. They measured hydrogen and helium, sampled the mud gas, got some MDT samples. They found spikes in the mud gas with high fracture density in the Cambrian Carrara limestone, which is an equivalent of what occurs up in the Flinders Ranges, a great thickness, and the Kulpara Formation, which is actually a dolomite above the granitic basement. None of these targets were deep, less than 1,000 metres. Drilling times were pretty short, so it's not that these wells need to be super expensive. They were case suspended for future drill stem testing, which took place earlier on this year, and recorded high levels of hydrogen and helium. I won't dwell on the well results, but a log is shown here of 1 and 2. The Carrara limestone is shown in bright green here, and the Kulpara dolomites are shown below it. They come across and correlate with the wells here. And I've got a blow up of the Ramsay 2 well. And you can see here the main testing, hydrogen, some very high spikes, not right underneath top seals, and about 800 metre section here with elevated readings of helium. In terms of the test results, probably the best way for those of you who are very technical is refer to the ASX releases of the 27th of May for the first one, and then a second one on the 17th of October this year. So quite new, where they confirm having got pretty high concentrations of dissolved helium in water and some higher readings at the wellhead. And of course, they managed to get flows, and so they've identified there's fractures in here that are flowing at a reasonable rate. And so the next stage then is to go ahead and do more work, and I'll show you what's planned there. In terms of the models, you know, how do we explore for this stuff? Clearly, the focus is not on petroleum sedimentary basins here. The processes for creating this natural hydrogen and to a certain extent helium are different. And so this is SEG's attempt to basically show, you know, in moderate depths, shallow hydrogen systems, you might have a couple of processes going on. You've got a radioactive Precambrian basement here with radiolysis going on, so basically breaking hydrogen into its 2 parts, water into its 2 parts, hydrogen and oxygen. And then in this areas and in these serpentinite belts, which are basically uplifted oceanic crust and transform margin areas, you get serpentinite and serpentinization. So you get iron in the presence of water creating hydrogen and iron oxides. And the migration of these hydrocarbons, hydrogen into shallower zones, either advective, so being carried in water, or simply diffusing through the sedimentary section. And if you went very deep, in the second concept that they thought about is if you have, say, granitic basements, that's degassing, giving off hydrogen, and then again you've got transport by water, diffusion, and one of the possible processes in the very hot sedimentary section where you have an absence or a paucity of oxygen is potentially converting methane through pyrolysis to break it apart and form carbon and hydrogen. So the test results, as I said, of helium have given quite a big thickness. recorded at the surface, both in the separator and in water, and then mention of a rarer isotope of helium as well. It's quite valuable. Hydrogen, 7 zones tested there, confirmed hydrogen, brought it to surface, very high concentrations across those zones. And so the next step is to drill a couple of wells and then try and figure out, can this be developed? Could it be an economic accumulation? They've got some 2D seismic. What they're going to do is try and go up dip from where they are and better define what the potential of this area is. So that's just a quick look on, could there be another way of trying to bring down the cost of hydrogen? For clean hydrogen, is this possible? And we're right at the very beginning, so there's a huge number of unanswered questions. The second technology is also something has been played around with again for a number of years, but geothermal energy has never really got a lot of attention in the energy transition. But it has some particular qualities that other energy sources, clean energy sources, don't. And that is, first of all, it can provide heat as well as electricity. In some cases, you can actually get it as a byproduct, say from lithium production in hot brines. It's long lasting, it's clean. As an electricity source, it can provide base load. And so it doesn't stop working when the wind stops blowing or the sun goes down. The plant's pretty efficient when they're working. It's got a pretty small ecological footprint, and you can turn these wells on and off pretty easily. And so more modern thinking has been, how can we increase the energy output, and can they be part of an integrated system? So if you want clean baseload energy, there's not many options to do this. And now the thought is going to, well, batteries don't last very long. This stuff lasts for huge amounts of time, longer than hydro. And so can you couple that with other systems to help create basically underwritten 24/7 clean energy combined with other forms of energy that are cheaper, such as wind and solar? As I said, the input of geothermal energy today in terms of total installed renewable electricity capacity is less than 0.5%. It's very small. And if you look at from heating as well, it's 0.3% of total heat consumption of energy through the variety of sources that are there. So not really very significant. When we think about geothermal energy, we think about low temperatures that produce basically heat below 150 degrees. If you want to make electricity, you really want to be over 150 degrees centigrade. And then when you start going into the higher temperatures, now we're talking about what I want to concentrate on a little bit. The first one is what we call enhanced geothermal systems, where in the USA, as they've learnt from shale and their fracking and their horizontal drilling, they're realizing that they can enhance these systems through those technologies and basically make the wells more productive, more connected. And so that's one of the technologies. But where I want to talk about today is, of course, that is limited, these technologies, to where you have heat at reasonable depth, where you have an aquifer, so you need water down there, but that's what you're using to bring your heat to surface, and where you have sufficient porosity and permeability to connect wells up that are separated from each other. And the question has been asked, well, can we get away from those last two constraints? And so in the second case here, advanced geothermal systems, and potentially the third one, the idea is to basically, in the second one, the advanced systems, is to drill horizontal wells and connect them up at the other end and case the whole lot. And so if you're using your own fluid in a closed loop system, you no longer need an aquifer and you no longer need rock permeability. And you've liberated yourself from two of the most difficult and challenging problems that geothermal systems have. The other system, though, is to try and go into the really, really hot temperatures. And they've realised that if you get up to about 400 degrees C, as they're experimenting up in Iceland and looking at other parts of the world, you may be able to get an order of magnitude more energy out of each well. And that's where some of the focus is on these last two systems. And just to put it in perspective, here's Iceland. You know, it sits on a mid-oceanic ridge. It's all volcanic, of course, as you know. There's eruptions going on there today. And around 90% of the homes are heated by geothermal sources, and it provides about 30% of their electricity in the country. It's the largest system in the world. It's been operating since 1930. It has over 2,000 kilometres of heating pipeworks in place, and it's been going for a long time. These wells are not very deep, about 2.5 kilometres deep. The temperature around 240, 300 degrees. But what happens if you went further? And that's what they've been testing. So they're now talking about supercritical, and this is where the term magma power comes into a certain extent. They think you can go from 5 megawatts up to 50 with better economics. And so this program started a long time ago. It's not a lot's been done on it over the years, because really now it's been the big focus on climate change and energy transition. But the IDDP that was put together drilled down to 4 kilometres, and they were targeting 3 wells. And the first one was drilled back in 2009. It hit actually magma at 2 kilometres, and they saved the well. Right, they were up at 1,000 degrees C. They plugged back, stabilised the well, and they produced steam at a world record 450 degrees centigrade. They never managed to get it connected up to the grid. They had a valve failure, and the well was eventually shut down. They then drilled the second well, and again it was fluid circulating around near a magma chamber, and they got fluid temperatures of 430 degrees. But they had a variety of problems, and this shows you how challenging it is at these super high temperatures. They lost circulation below 3 Ks. They think they had a casing collapse at 2.3 Ks. They had a whole pile of scaling by salt precipitation. And then a couple of years later, they put in cold water injection to try and get rid of the salt, wash it out of the system basically, and stimulate the reservoir, but they never really brought it back on at any significant flow rates. And now they think there's another blockage. So it shows how challenged it is. We saw those same challenges in Australia with geothermal. And so the opportunities and challenges here is that we've demonstrated that you can actually drill wells into these very high temperature heats. You've just got to try and manage them. The questions are, you know, what is the well cost? What is the durability of these wells? How do you deal with scaling, particularly as temperatures drop, as the fluids come up through the well and they precipitate solids? And what permeability loss do you have if you get down into these very, very high temperatures where the actual property of the rock itself changes from being brittle to being ductile, and then the ability to have fractures stay open becomes more problematic. And we've seen in hot, dry rocks, well, it was a hot, wet rock that geodynamics was chasing in the Cooper Basin. You know, we saw very expensive wells here, accelerated impact from higher temperatures, and difficulty maintaining production rates. But there's a lot of work going on in the USA, in the Department of Energy, supporting pilots, and of course they continue to learn from what's going on in Iceland. So that's all I wanted to say today. It's just a quick overview of a couple of side elements that are fairly new around the energy transition of the 12 modules that I teach in the 2-day course. So with that, I'll hand back to Cecile. You're on mute, Cecile.
Sorry. Okay. Thanks for that, Professor Moore. That was really mind-boggling, and no doubt clean energy really does feel like it's on the edge of something huge. And there's so much to take in. So for those of you who want to learn more, we'll be delivering the Energy Transition Masterclass and oil and gas training courses next year in all major cities locally here in Australia and also throughout the APAC region. These are some of the public dates. But however, we also offer private and bespoke custom program for a larger group of audience. And if you'd like to sign up for any of these courses coming up or want to have a private chat with any of the clean energy projects that you are working on or any future projects or any initiative that you have within your organization, we're more than happy to organize a quick catch up with Professor Moore. Can we move on to the Q&A section? Can I have the next slide? Okay. So the first question, Professor Moore, I've got here is, it is about the question that we talked about, the history and international interest you mentioned earlier. Is it known whether there are any hydrogen deposits in Indonesia that could be extracted? If so, what kind of projects are being developed? If you've got any insight or any knowledge in that area.
Yeah, look, I've read the literature on what's been explored and documented around the world, and I haven't heard anything yet from Indonesia. So it's a pretty simple answer to that one. In terms of what opportunities they may have, you know, it's a complicated geology in Indonesia. I think what we know just in general terms is that you need to get into these old basement areas that have got pretty high heat in them, but you're talking normally about these Precambrian provinces in all of the cases that people are documenting. And then it's a matter of doing sampling, you know, for hydrogen. And one of the things that we've learnt is that you need fairly sophisticated tools to sample and detect hydrogen. You know, the old detectors, the gas detectors in exploration petroleum wells, you know, are not designed for that. And that's another reason why you would never pick up hydrogen in a petroleum well. Not that, you know, we've really seen much.
Right. Okay. So just as a follow-up to that, and just out of my personal interest, Professor Moore there. So in terms of this race, how do you see Australia's effort in hydrogen exploration comparing to the global initiatives that we have? Where do we stand in the race?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of those two wells that have been drilled, we're right at the forefront in terms of having taken it forward to actually drilling and testing. I think one of the advantages that Australia has is that we're a very big landmass, and a lot of it is very, very old. And so you know, we are a great nation of minerals, you know, hosted in a lot of these very old rocks and old provinces. And while the focus to date has been on South Australia because of that old Middleton waterborne, you know, it was renamed Ramsay, I can think of other areas in Australia quite clearly where some of these geological elements are well represented and should provide hydrogen and natural hydrogen exploration targets in other states.
Great. Thanks for that. Let me take up another question. So I've got another question here. With the rapid advancement in energy technologies such as the Advanced Geothermal System or AGS and supercritical geothermal, what emerging innovations are you most excited about in terms of their potential impact on Australia's clean energy goals?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Of those two that we've talked about today, I would put natural hydrogen ahead of geothermal, and that is because Australia itself generally is not a super hot province. And I think to bring these super hot rocks into play, you don't want to be spending huge amounts of money drilling wells. That's a big part of the cost equation here. And so where people will look at this is where the geothermal gradients are very high. And so that favours countries where they are high, where there are magmas or granites near the surface. The hottest area of Australia, incidentally, is actually in the Cooper Basin where geodynamics did their original work. And whether anyone could go back there in the future and reinvent that with new technology. There's another hot area up in the Northern Territory, up towards the Darwin area. It gets a bit warm around Perth Basin, but as a nation, we're not a super hot nation. It's the Ring of Fire countries, areas, and other areas that are much hotter than we are. In terms of other technologies that are emerging, I think probably the areas I see, almost every technology that we talk about has got some good things going on about it. The advances in bringing down the cost of batteries, the new battery technologies that, the solid state, flow batteries, these sorts of things, and then the whole economies of scale to bring down costs. So we've seen it with solar. We've seen it now with offshore wind. The mass manufacture of turbine blades, for example, new materials being used. All of these things are progressing, and I think where we see new applications of technologies. We might think that, for example, green hydrogen is expensive, but one of the things that they're starting to realise, for say green steel, is that if you put green steel into a Mercedes car made in Europe, it'll only add about 1 or 2% of the total cost of the car, even if the hydrogen is expensive to make that green steel. And so you've got to think about the cost of these alternate technologies, not only just how much it costs to make them, but how much it costs to transport them, how they get used, and where you can use them in future.
Right. Thanks for that. Are we taking up any questions? Got one last question over here. Okay, let me just take this one. So I've got the question related to South Australia. So with the growing interest in hydrogen projects in South Australia, do you think it's realistic to expect large-scale production of natural hydrogen in the near future?
We don't know, is the answer.
Right.
I'll give you two examples of that'll give you a little bit of caution here. The first is that in terms of thinking about a gas that's coming out of, say, fractures in a dominantly water-bearing reservoir, the issue is the water tends to overcome gas. These accumulations that they're seeing are naturally percolating, but there's no real evidence been shown to me to date that there's a gas cap above a water leg as you would have in a major gas field, for example. And where we've seen, for example, in natural gas production in Western Australia, for example, they've been trying to produce tight gas out of fields like Warrow, and they drilled and fracked about half a dozen wells there. And the problem with that was that, yes, they could get gas production out of it, and then there was free gas there, but the water just got in the way. It swamped everything, and it really hurt the economics of what am I going to do with all this water? I'm not getting my gas rates because all the water is in the pipes. Now, of course, in coal seam wells, they produce a lot of water, and there's ways of pumping that water out and keeping the gas flowing. But eventually, in coal seam gas wells, the water goes away, and then you've got at least clean gas being produced. So this issue of, if the hydrogen is actually embedded in the water and you have to produce all this water to get the hydrogen out, it's different from saying have a big gas field like, Gorgon or Pluto, where it's free gas, it's contained under a big reservoir, under a big seal, and you can produce it without having to produce anything else. So that's a real critical question that will affect the economics, the flow rates, and the magnitude of what you can produce in what amount of time and how much it'll cost you to produce. The other caution is that I was involved as a director of Central Petroleum, and we drilled a well called Mount Kitty up in the Amadeus, and we found 9% helium. So here's another case of one of these very valuable gases. Unfortunately, before the test was completed, someone took down some guy wires off the rig tower, and the rig tower collapsed. So we never really finished all of that testing. But incidentally, that well is quite a few years old now, and the operator has not gone back to that. It's sealed underneath there's salt up there, so it's got some good seals up there, and there will be future attempts. But one of the things I learned there is that in that case, if you get a gas, you've got to have enough concentration to support some sort of processing on site in order to clean up the gas and then be able to take it away. And so one of the challenges I think is going to be in some of these places like, the outback of Australia is getting it to market, because, if you're down to the level of trying to extract it and put it in a bottle and truck it out, that's not going to give you fantastic volumes at any great rate. So there's quite I'm not trying to be down on anything, but there's quite a lot of unknowns still to be worked through in terms of production rate, what else is going to be produced with, what are the other things in the gases, what is the cost of transport, what is the cost of extraction and processing, and a whole string of economic factors that will be addressed once they actually know exactly what is the nature of this deposit, and is it standalone gas, or is it just percolating gas that's not really very concentrated. For this thing to work, I think you really need some sort of a trapping mechanism. So if there is percolating gas, it is ending up in a trap and accumulated in quantities in the same way that we think about hydrocarbon gases.
Thanks for that. Okay, I think we're slightly running behind the time. Do you have time for last one question, Pete?
Yeah, I'll try and answer it quickly then.
All right. So would you believe the target production cost for green hydrogen is likely to be for a commercially available product for the midterm future?
Yeah, look, again, no quick answer to this. At the moment, if you're producing dirty hydrogen, so from gas, natural gas, generally we talk about production costs of about $1 to $2. We think that if you had a really good CCS project attached to it, you could make clean hydrogen if you're willing to accept that blue hydrogen, so natural gas with CCS, can be done, and it's clean, because that's what we care about. We don't care what colour it is, we just care that it's clean. We may be able to do that for just an addition of 50 cents or $1. So, you're down at reasonable levels. And they're economic, because at the moment we produce about 100 million tonnes, just under 100 million tonnes a year of hydrogen, dirty hydrogen, to make fertilizers, ammonia, and to run oil refineries, petrochemical plants, sorry. At the moment, though, if we want to make it through electrolysis and electricity, generally the costs that people are talking about are like $4 to $9. And I've even seen the Europeans say for us it's 4 to 9 euros. And those costs are generally thought to be unsustainable without subsidies and government support. And you can't do that forever. So how do you bring the cost down of those sources? Well, first of all, you have two sources of cost. One is the cost of electricity. And in Australia at the moment, the average cost of electricity on the grid is $150. It needs to come down to probably 20. And the cost of electrolyzers. And they won't come down until you have enough demand to start manufacturing them. But the hope here, based on what they've seen out of Mali and what they've done some calculations on, is that you could possibly produce natural hydrogen for $1. Now, if their claims are correct, and some calculations have been done on Mali that says it's 50 cents to $1, but it's a tiny quantity. If their claims are correct and you could do this at scale, then that will clearly be economic. But the economics depend, there's no cut-off here. It depends on what the customer is willing to pay. And if people have to clean up their steel, clean up their other things, and the best way to do it is hydrogen in these hard to decarbonize areas, then part of it will depend on what is the cost of reducing my emissions. And that will depend partly on what is the penalty I'll pay for making them, and will I still have a license to operate anyhow? And so if you start talking about $100 a tonne for carbon in Europe, then that's a fairly high penalty, and you can therefore tolerate a higher price of your clean hydrogen, for example. So it is complicated, and that's some of the things that we go into when we talk about these products in terms of the longer 2-day energy transition course that I teach.
Right. Thanks for that. So that actually brings us to the end of today's broadcast. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and a big shout out to Professor Peter Moore for sharing such valuable insights. And as communicated earlier, this recording will be sent out to all the registered participants. So that's all from my side. And thank you everyone once again. And thank you, Peter.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
See ya. Bye.